Since before recorded history, the people of Britain have had first-hand experience of the strange and unusual. Spirits who haunt ancient castles, stories of werewolves and banshees roaming the countryside, and fantastic creatures like gnomes, fairies and pixies, all are firmly embedded in our native folklore. This cultural experience makes us uniquely qualified to research these types of phenomena and help us find the truth of the reality that surrounds us. So sit back and relax as your hosts, Irene Allen Block and Mark Johnson, take you on a journey through this strange realm and together help us find the answers to the mysteries that lie just beyond our grasp. Welcome to Paranormal UK Radio.
Hi everybody, this is the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show of the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Irene Allen Block, and with me tonight again is our birthday boy, Marky Johnson.
Yeah, I like that one. We're going to keep that one in.
Another blooper.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, if people only heard how many takes we get before we actually do the show.
You know, Mark, we should do that. We should keep all the bloopers and then put them out in a show separate.
No, we could certainly do that. I'm sure our listeners would enjoy it.
Oh, you'd have them rolling around on the floor.
Yeah, yes.
So Mark, we're going to get straight into this tonight because you're now 58 years old.
No, back it up. Take 3 years off of that.
58.
55. Double nickel. 55.
Oh my God! Well, that's just as bad, isn't it? Christ Almighty! Over here, in another 5 years, you'll be able to draw your pension.
Yeah.
And you will get a free bus pass to go on the buses.
Yeah, at this rate, I won't be able to get my Social Security for about another 20 years. If I'm lucky, if it's still there.
What? Social Security? Social Security over here is a different thing to a pension.
Well, that's what they call it over here. Yeah, you're a pensioner over here. We get Social Security, which even then is not much. Especially when our politicians keep dipping into the fund and borrowing from it to fund their own projects.
Anyway, so you had your birthday this weekend, and did you enjoy it?
Yes, I was except I was freezing my tail off. We went to...
you nearly said nuts, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
You little squirrel.
Or for British bullocks. But... yeah, we went down to Philly for the weekend, but pretty much it was so cold. There was an unscheduled snowstorm, froze our rear ends off, tried going to Eastern State Penitentiary. It was so bloody cold that I couldn't feel my face, so we wound up calling in an early weekend. And now, of course, I've got a cold settling in, so thank you very much. Mother Nature really is off her meds right now. Because, it was so cold in almost single digits this weekend, and now it's like pushing 60 degrees, and I have the windows open.
Oh, never mind. You'll be all right. You will be all right.
Oh, I'm sure
I'm sure of it. Anyway, you last week, you and Andy took the show last week because I wasn't around.
No.
That's correct.
No, I'm glad you're feeling better, though. That was a good...
Yeah, and I just want to say... hello from me to XLR Radio, all the listeners at XLR Radio. I know you said it last week, but I haven't said it, so I'm saying it now.
Okay. Well,
hello, everyone.
We have picked up XLR Radio is simulcasting our show on Wednesday nights at 10 p.m., so you'll also hear us on the Paranormal UK Radio Network and XLR Radio for our friends in the UK.
Mm-hmm. That's very good.
Yep. Very
good. And you had a good birthday. I had a good weekend. So all's well that ends well, isn't it, really?
And Gertie met a couple of celebrities.
Yes, she did. She met Jagger and Woody from Heart FM. Yeah.
Now, tell me again who Jagger and Woody are, since I'm not over there, so.
They're the radio hosts that do the breakfast show on Heart FM Wales.
Oh, lovely.
They are a couple of celebrities, very funny fellas, and they are absolutely great people. Absolutely great people. And of course, Gertie had her photograph taken. Not me, Gertie. You know, Gertie gets the photograph, not me.
Well, Gertie is the diva.
Gertie, for everyone that doesn't know, or for anyone that doesn't know, should I say, is the Paranormal UK Radio Network mascot and brand. She's a British bulldog.
Yes. Gertie, the paranormal pup.
That's it. Gertie, the paranormal pup.
She
That's
barks
her
at the ghosts in your house and doesn't let them get any rest.
She doesn't let anyone get any rest, I tell you. But anyway, she had her photograph taken with Jagger and Woody, and you can see it on the Paranormal UK Radio Facebook network page.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, it was quite sweet, sweet actually, because what she was doing, we took her vet where Gertie attends. We had floods there. The whole of Wales got flooded a few months back, and the actual surgery, operating theatre, the vets in general, was totally flooded and ruined, so they had to rebuild the whole place. So it was Saturday was opening day, so I took Gertie along, and she met quite a few little dogs there. She got a lovely kiss off a British bulldog, and she came away with a little booty bag.
Aw.
Yeah,
her little bag of swag.
Yeah, which was nice. Yeah. So let's get on with the show.
Let's get on with the show. Well, our guests tonight have been on the show a couple of times before in the past. We always love having them on, and we've got a really good topic discussing tonight. We are talking of Trish and Rob MacGregor. Now, for those of you not familiar with them, you should be, I'll tell you. Both are authors of both many different fiction and nonfiction books, and they've written extensively on paranormal with the UFOs in the backyard, and of their book on synchronicity. And now we're talking to them tonight about their new book, Secrets of Spirit Communication, Techniques for Tuning In and Making Contact. So Trish and Rob, welcome to the program.
You two have a lot of fun.
Yeah, we have a lot of arguments too, Trish. I got to tell you that.
Well, somebody has to keep her in line.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
It's nice to meet you.
Again. So let's talk about secrets. When I saw the cover for this book, it immediately intrigued me. And with Irene and I, both our experiences in for lack of a better word, the paranormal over the years. We've had our own experiences in a lot of different locations. And this one, especially with techniques for tuning in and making contact, it's hitting me personally, too, because, as we were mentioning, this weekend was my birthday. And I've mentioned before, I had an identical twin brother, Bill, and he passed away a couple of years ago. And so it's one of the things where this would interest me in being able to be more open and able to communicate with him or with the other side. So tell us a little bit about the book and how you came about writing this one.
I have a question first.
Okay.
You had an identical twin brother. Okay, he passed. At the time it happened, did you feel anything physically?
No, I did not. I know a lot of people think that with twins, and we never had that kind of psychic connection. Instead, it's not like we could read each other's minds either. Instead, I knew how his mind worked because it worked very similar to mine, but he was still his own person. And but we never had that kind of a psychic connection. So no, I was not aware of it when it happened.
That's interesting. Because some people do, not just twins, but like father-sons, things like that, sisters, mothers.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways that spirits make contact with us, and that ways that your brother might come through, and not just as like an image or a voice either, because it's often involves synchronicity. For example, sometimes there's been instances where a clock stops at the time of the death of a loved one, or a broken radio begins to play as you talk about a deceased one who owned the radio, or you open a book and find a photo of that lost loved one just as you were thinking about him or her, or talking with somebody.
Or an animal that you both liked might appear.
Yeah. So these are examples of spirit contact and synchronicity.
Do you know something?
Yeah.
You're talking about that. I lost my mother a year ago at Christmas time. And shortly after that, the radio kept playing a silly little song called Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. I think it was sung by Perry Como. When I was a child, she used to always sing that to me. But every time I put the radio on would come Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It's not as if it's not as if it's even in the charts or anything.
Right. Yeah, that's a form of contact. Music is pretty common.
Yeah, we have a story in the book about a man who was fascinated by cardinals. He had bird feeders and cardinals would come. He had pictures and a little statue of cardinals in his bedroom. He was sick for a number of years, and he had different images around him related to cardinals. They just fascinated him. And after his death, his daughter, everywhere she went, she would come across cardinals. She would open a magazine, and there would be a cardinal.
Or Christmas cards.
She worked in an office where she would be opening the incoming mail and the Christmas cards, and there was one after another of cardinals, and she thought, well, maybe there's something special going on with cardinals this year, but she found that wasn't the case at all. It was just that they were just coming in one after another of cardinals. And she went to a record shop and bought an album by Hart and took it home, and it had kind of a mythical cover on a folklorish cover. And when she got home, she saw what the cover was a woman opening her sweater, and in her chest is a bird cage with a cardinal inside.
Can I just explain here? Cardinals is not a bird that we have over here in the UK. Cardinal is one of these little red birds, isn't it? A red cardinal you've got out there?
Yes.
Right,
It's in the finch family.
And they
it's not like
they have a crest on their head.
Yeah, they do have a crest on their head.
Yeah, it's not a common bird to the UK.
Right. Yeah, and like you have robins, but they're not the same robins that we have. They're a little smaller bird that is actually unrelated to the robin that we know as a robin redbreast here.
Yeah, we have robin redbreasts, and they're always around at Christmas and on Christmas cards.
The reason I asked you, Mark, about that, about if you had felt anything when your brother passed, is one of the more interesting stories we have in here is from a man who's probably the only psychiatrist alive who's now studying synchronicity, but in a serious way. And it started when, in 1973, at 11 p.m., one February night, he started choking for no reason. He hadn't had anything to drink, nothing to eat, and it went on for about 15 minutes, and he was he was scared. But then afterwards, he was bewildered. And the next day, his brother called him. He was on the West Coast, and his brother lived on the East Coast. So the next day, his brother called him and told him that that morning, their father had died from choking on his own blood, and it was exactly the same time where he was.
What was that date again?
It was February 27th, 1973.
Okay, February 27th.
At 11 p.m.
I thought you said February 9th, which is significant for me.
Oh, is that your birthday?
Well, no, mine was the 3rd, but the 9th, my father passed away 12 years ago on the 9th. And what's ironic with that is he passed away, and 6 hours later, the next day, my niece was born. So talk about the circle of life.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That happened with my grandfather. My grandfather died, and at the exact moment he died, my nephew, the first grandson, was born. The first great-grandson.
If that's reincarnation, if that's immediate reincarnation. I've always wondered that.
Doesn't really give the spirit time to process, doesn't it?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I'm going back in 6 hours.
Instantaneously back.
Well, they say one goes, one comes, don't they?
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, time is an illusion, too, so...
That's why the baby yelled, "No! Not again."
Yeah. I'm done with that.
That's why they pulled me into this world kicking and screaming, like, not again!
Not again.
Crap! well,
I hope you have better internet connections this time around.
Yeah. Well, you were mentioning earlier the synchronicities, whether of music or with the Cardinals. There is one synchronicity that I did realize that I had with my brother. It happened a couple months after he passed, and then it happened again over this weekend where there's the Pink Floyd song, "Wish You Were Here," would start playing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Was that on the birthday?
Yeah.
On your birthday and William's birthday, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd say that's probably spirit contact.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is too, because the few times that it happened in the past, it happened at significant times and kept repeating too. So I had a feeling, my intuition was kicking in and saying, yeah, I think this is a message.
Well, that's anytime you have a cluster synchronicity like that related to somebody who has passed, that's spirit contact, at least in my book.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I definitely thought it was my mother trying to tell me something when I kept hearing "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those cluster experiences are important.
Well, you had previously written a whole book on synchronicity.
We've written several.
We're
kind of obsessed.
Yeah, we wrote
several books on one subject.
On synchronicity. Yeah, but different facets. I mean, according to Carl Jung, synchronicity was like the big umbrella of many aspects of the paranormal. Mm-hmm. So we've written on precognition, which was sensing the future, the 7 secrets of synchronicity, synchronicity on the other side, and now this book on spirit contact.
Synchronicity Highway, too.
Oh, and also on aliens in the backyard and synchronicity. All these experiences are somehow connected to synchronicity.
Well, I think synchronicity in itself is something that's very intriguing, and it's something that is too often overlooked as coincidence by mainstream science or mainstream society. Synchronicity is one of those markers to me that tells you that reality isn't quite what we think it is, and there are things going on and things being able to be manipulated, almost kind of like we're in the Matrix, where somebody is able to hit that button on a program and make that song play at the right time and just have things happen to you.
Well, that's the kind of thing that Dr. Bernard Bateman is studying as a psychiatrist. He's the one who had the choking experience. And it's fascinating because he's kind of taking Jung's basis of everything and expanding it. He's got a podcast. He's got a book called Connecting with Coincidence. So it's nice to see some mainstream people doing that kind of work.
Yeah. So the everyday world that we live in, we exist in linear time where one event follows another, but there's a deeper reality of existence where that everything that exists came from this up through this deeper sense of reality where there is no time or space in the ordinary sense. So the contact then between that deeper level of reality and our everyday reality is synchronicity. Why these puzzling things come up. How could that possibly happen? There was no cause and effect as we know it. So that's how I see this connection.
What's interesting, too, is the scientist, quantum physicist David Bohm, he came up with a theory that the implicate order, the unfolded order, is what's beneath the everyday reality. And what we see is the explicate order, or what's unfolded. And Rob and I think that synchronicity lies along the border between the two. So it's our most accessible experience of synchronicity and of the implicate order.
Well, I believe even with modern string theory, Dr. Michio Kaku was a big proponent of string theory. They talk about that all time really is happening at once. It's just our perception of time is the only thing that's linear. So our brains and our perception is only able to process this information in a linear format, when actuality all time is happening at once. It's like Douglas Adams once said, "Time is an illusion, lunchtime doubly so."
Gosh, I wonder what he's doing now.
He's traveling through the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Exactly.
With his towel.
If people like that have come back yet.
It's it's so hard to say. I mean, and again, we look at it as, have they been back yet? Have they been? I mean, we've talked about different concepts on this show that are real brain benders. About, again, when we say coming back yet, that's a linear thought form.
Right, it is.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, he could already be here.
He could already be.
He never left.
and this gets into living possible multiple lives at the same time.
Right.
And we could also exist on the other side of death at the same time as we're living here as well.
Well, Irene and I have had a lot of very deep discussions about this over the years. And, I liken it to, instead of like a spirit, coming in down to human form, being born in a physical body, live a lifetime, die, go back up, process, and come back down again and again and again and again. I liken it like we have our main mind, the superconscious, whatever you want to call it, the mind, the seat of the soul, and it puts out more like tentacles, and each tentacle branches out and goes into another lifetime, another timeline, dimension, whatever, and so everything is being experienced at once, downloaded into like this central brain or processing unit.
Well, it's like the many worlds theory.
Exactly. I was going to suggest that every time you make a decision of significance, there was that other decision you didn't make that you could have made, and that reality exists as well. And so there's like two yous that are very similar.
Or more.
Then they split off too. So.
Yeah.
So every time I chose paper over plastic, it causes a new eddy in the space-time continuum.
Right.
It's pretty mind-blowing, isn't it?
Yeah. That makes.
I'm saying it's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe we're all schizophrenic. That's what it begins to sound like.
I'm sure many people will think we are.
Well, when you start turning reality on its head, I mean, here's the thing that always gets me is, people want to look at reality. Everybody just wants to live their life, punch their time card, go to work, collect their paycheck, buy food, go to a movie, get married, have kids, live this life in this physical plane. We all become little consumers here in our Western world, and yet, most people tend to completely ignore all the other things that are around us, the strangeness. They have it programmed out of them at such a young age. Society conditions it out of you or says it's taboo. You can't think about that.
Right.
And there's a fear factor, too.
Oh, yes. I know about the fear factor.
Contact.
It's also the societal conditioning that we're told, you're supposed to be afraid of ghosts and spirits.
Right.
Whether for religious...
And it's also, it can be religious, too. If you're taught from a young age that to even think about this stuff is a sin, or it's related to Satan or whoever, you tend to shy away from it.
And also the media. I mean, the entertainment media. Look at how many, when it involves beings from the other side, how many are friendly compared to horrendous vampires,
zombies,
and all kinds of creatures from the other side. You know, you can probably name on one hand the friendly ones, like
Ghost.
Like Ghost.
That was the most accurate depiction, right. I think.
Ghost was was a very interesting movie. I didn't quite agree with like the whole. There's parts of it I didn't agree with, but you know, for the most part, how they treated it was fairly accurate. Except I, you know, sometimes think that when some people, when they do cross over or pass out of this life, and being a paranormal investigator, this is something that we have dealt with doing investigations, is you're sometimes dealing with things that are earthbound or still here. And
absolutely,
I think they're more in kind of like a fugue state, a very dreamlike state. It's hard it's not like being 100% conscious, like Patrick Swayze running around and talking to people and you know, being so fully conscious, because again, that implies linear time, going from point A to point B and thinking about it, and doing, where when you're in that other state, time is a lot more fluid.
Yeah, but they only had 2 hours to tell their story.
Yeah. What are you talking about? Ghosts themselves?
Ghosts themselves, not the other types of phenomena that we sometimes mistake for ghosts, such as time slips.
The difference between spirits and ghosts, interesting as well.
Yeah, we had one experience. There's a town of mediums in Central Florida called Casadega. I mean, it's totally unlike any other town in Florida. There are hills. It looks like something from, you know, the houses look like Cape Cod houses. And everybody there is a medium. So these are all people who talk to the dead. And there's a haunted hotel that's right in the center of the community. And when our daughter was young, we went up there to get readings, basically. And the hotel was empty because it was Daytona Bike Week. So everybody was in Daytona. So we got a room on the top floor, and about 11 o'clock that night, turned out the lights. Or, no, we were reading.
Yeah, we were reading.
Yeah, and Megan, our daughter, was only about a year old, so she was sound asleep. And we hear this loud thumping on the floors. It sounded like somebody wearing really heavy-duty boots clomping up the stairs. And I looked at Rob and said, I thought the hotel was empty. And he said, well, who's that then? And this clomping kept coming towards our room and coming towards our room. We got freaked out.
Yeah, I went to the door, put my hand on that door, but there was just this sense of evil that was emanating from whatever was on the other side of that door. That there was no way I was going to turn that handle. And we're not people who are frightened of spirits either. I mean, but we
were so freaked out we pushed the dresser.
We actually pushed the dresser in front of the door. We were so freaked out by whatever was out there, and then the door handle jiggled, and that was it. Trish ran over and grabbed our daughter off the bed.
I was looking for another way out.
Well, sounds like an interesting hotel.
Then it just moved away.
And I told the clerk about it the next morning. He says, all our spirits are friendly. And I said, well, this one wasn't.
We only have friendly ghosts here.
Well, that one wasn't, obviously. If you got that gut feeling that there was something evil the other side of that door, you were correct not to open that door.
Oh, yeah. There was no way we were opening that door.
But you talking about heavy boots coming upstairs. Don't they just love to do that? My one here. He's always doing that. Like, he's wearing hobnail boots, bang, 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 all the way up the stairs. And the amount of people that have visited this house and heard it is unbelievable.
Is it an old house?
Yeah. Yeah. But, he's not evil. You don't get any evil feeling from him. The only time that he ever makes me feel like I want to puke up is when he's in the bedroom. And he used to be a blacksmith. He was a deacon of the local chapel as well, but he was a blacksmith by trade. And when he comes into the bedroom, he smells of a mixture of oil and burnt metal.
Oh, wow.
And I tell you, it is nauseating. I have to say, I can be laying in bed, clear off, Herbert.
Well, at least you know who he is.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know him. I know who he is. Yeah. And I recognize him by that smell. Whereas Annie, the other ghost, she uses lavender. When she's around, it's lavender,
Yeah, smells seem to be a real component, another component of spirit contact. Don't you think, Rob?
Yeah, I remember when we were at what's the name of that hotel in Asheville, Trish?
The Biltmore.
The Biltmore Hotel is a huge mansion there. And we were walking around, and this place was built in somewhere in the 1800s, and like 300 rooms, 300 bedrooms. Who would need so many bedrooms? So we're walking around, and we get to a room that was a library. It's still a library, but and we smell cigar.
Pipe tobacco.
No, it's cigar smoke.
Yeah.
And there's no smoking in there. And then we see the guard, and we said, we just smelled some cigar smoke, and he nodded, and he said, "Yeah, that's one of our ghosts."
And yet, the Biltmore officially says the place is not haunted.
Right. They say they're very explicit about it. They say no one ever died in this house. There are no ghosts. I mean, it's strange how you think they would play on that. Oh, there are ghosts. You come and see them, but no, it's just the opposite.
And also, you don't have to die in a house for a place for it to be haunted.
True.
No, that's true. They drift in and out, especially in this house.
Well,
I was telling Mark the other day.
Mention about your visitor last week.
Yeah, last week I walked into the sitting room and the strong smell of BO, body odor.
Geez.
Absolutely terrible smell of body odor in that room. And I knew instantly that it wasn't anything to worry about, and that this was obviously a wandering spirit that's just going through the house, stopped off for a little while, and that he would move on his own. And, it didn't worry me one bit. He was in there for quite some time, and there was a time when I went into the old parlour, and it was as if he followed me in there. But when I came out of the old parlour to go back into the family room, he obviously must have gone back into the sitting room, because I went into the family room, no smell, came back out, went in the sitting room, there was the smell. And I knew straight away what he looked like, what he was wearing, everything about him. And my gut instinct told me that there was nothing to worry about, and he was just kind of like resting in there for a little while, and he'd move on in his own time. And by the time we'd done the show that night, or by the time Mark went on to the show that night, he was gone. Literally
Did you
gone.
ask him to
I was
identify
correct.
himself?
No, I just knew to leave him alone.
Huh.
Yeah, it was just, it's an instinct. You know when to talk with them, to communicate or attempt to communicate with them, and when to just leave them alone, let them do their own thing, and they'll just go when they're ready. And
maybe you should have told him to take a bath.
I did.
That's funny.
I did actually. I did say that the bathroom was free upstairs if he wanted to go and have a freshen up. But I said that jokingly,
Yeah, but what would he use? Ecto soap?
Yeah, really.
No, I did. At one point when I went in there, you stink. I said, if you want to go out the bathroom, go up the bathroom. But
funny.
yeah. But with others, you know when to communicate. You know when they want to communicate with you. But a lot of what the communication is like, well, with a lot of people, it's symbols. It's not that with me. Mm-hmm. But you can feel it. You feel what they're trying to tell you. It's all in. Oh, it's very difficult to explain. Mm-hmm. But never mind. Carry on.
I think with ghosts, though, most of them, I think, are like on a loop. I mean, they may not even be aware of your existence there. Yeah. They're just repeating the same thing over and over again. Where with spirit contact, that's where there's communication, and I no doubt there's something in between that as well. There's one story that I remember we were told by a friend of ours who has some mediumistic abilities herself, and she also lives in a house that is haunted with a ghost or spirit. And so this happened at Thanksgiving here in late November, where all the family was gathered and sitting around the table ready to eat, and somebody raised a wine glass and say, let's everybody raise your wine glass. If there's a spirit here, if there's a ghost here, show yourself. And that person's wine glass just shattered at that moment, sending glass and wine over the table. So that was a synchronicity.
Yeah. But definitely spirit contact.
But how rude! They spilled the wine.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I would get a rag and soak it up, and just squeeze
quiet.
it. Yeah, especially if it was Pinot. Yeah. I don't know if we talked about this when you were on last time, but when we're talking about ghosts or spirits, and you mentioned that sometimes they repeat like a loop, and a lot of paranormal investigators try calling that a residual haunting, where something is playing over and over again. And they try to blame everything from like underground water to limestone to, full moon to everything. And yet I begin to feel that really what that is what you're dealing with is a type of a time slip. You're not really seeing a ghost at all or hearing.
That's a good point.
Hearing a ghost.
That's interesting.
Well, Irene and I have discussed this on a number of occasions where
we discussed a hell of a lot of stuff.
Where we talk about that, let's say you walk into a room, and I'm paraphrasing a similar experience that we mentioned that Irene had a couple of different times. You walk into a room, and all of a sudden you see the apparition of a person in front of you, and let's say. They're either going through those motions, like you see a woman in like 1800s garb and she walks down the stairs and then is gone.
Right.
Did you see a ghost, or did you see a real person who just happens to be in a different time frame, and for whatever reason the conditions are right that they overlap with one another? If all time is happening at once, it's feasible that you're seeing a blending briefly of two time periods. That's why they may even look.
Have actually slipped back. So that you are seeing.
That makes sense to me now, because there's a story that we heard that I could never figure out, because the ghost was not a person, but it was a train, and this train went right through a hotel room, and people would see it on a particular day of the year. And how could a train be a ghost? But if you think in terms of
time slips, it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes more sense.
But Rob, what happened with me when on one particular occasion when this happened and I saw this woman, she actually looked at me. She was as shocked to see me as I was to see her.
Oh, that's really interesting.
It was evident on her face. She must have thought she'd seen a ghost.
Yeah, you were her ghost. It's like that Nicole Kidman movie, The Others.
Yeah, The Others.
Yeah, that was a great movie. I mean, for the longest time you thought Nicole Kidman's house was haunted, but she was the spirit.
But see, that's a different.
Sorry, spoiler alert.
Yeah, the movie's been out long enough. People should realize it. Like Six said, Bruce Willis was dead. Anyway,
yeah. But anyway, that would be like the time slip, because both of those realities existed at once in that house.
But not exactly, because she was dead. She killed her kids, herself and her kids, and we're still home in the house. No, what we're thinking of is where two living, breathing human beings are in the same room together, and they happen to see each other, but they're existing in different time periods. So neither one of them is dead, per se.
Yeah.
They're very much alive, but because of the conditions, they see each other, maybe even transparently because of the overlapping effect, and they think they've just seen a ghost.
Yeah. Now that's what I'm saying. It would make a good novel.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah, that would be good. Where you've got the two time periods, they're both the characters are all still alive in both time periods.
Yeah,
Shall I tell you the situation I was in at the time? I'll tell you the situation. It was a beautiful old mansion house that my son was living in. Okay, and we went upstairs. He took me around the house. We were looking all around the house, me, my husband, and my son. And he took me up into the attics. Now, in the attic was where the house staff, the maids and everybody lived up in the attic. And as they came out of the door from the attic to go back down the stairs, and I was the last one out. They'd just gone out into the landing place just outside the door. I'm moving my hands like an Italian here. I'm trying to explain this. And,
remember, this is radio.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Anyway, just as I was about to walk out the door, there she was, right there, with her mouth open, in shock, looking at me, and I was looking at her. And for that moment, for that split second, it was like we communicated. And she was obviously the I can't remember what they're called now. The main maid of the house, the housekeeper.
Right.
She was obviously the housekeeper. And
was she dressed like from another time?
Yes, she was like from the 1920s, 30s.
Wow.
She was dressed
well,
that
I
sort
wish
of
you'd struck up a conversation.
Oh, yeah, but just
Hey,
at
what's it like over there?
Trish, at that split second, my son turned around and said, "Are you coming, Mum?" And that was it,
Wow.
But another time, I was in a house in Crystal Palace, and I've been living in this house for quite some time. It was a big old Victorian house, several floors and one thing or another. And I was the only one in the house that day, and I came in from the garden. It was summertime, and I walked into one of the rooms. And as I walked into the room, it was just it was totally different. The wallpaper was different. The furniture was different. Everything was different. And I stood there and I looked down at the floor and I saw my shoes. And then as soon as that happened, click, it all went back to the way it should have been. And a friend of mine said, what happened to bring you out of that was the fact that you saw on your feet modern day shoes. You looked down and it was yeah.
This sounds a lot like the novel Time and Again by Jack Finney, because when he finally went back into the 1800s, what would bring him out is if he saw his modern day shoes or something from the modern day.
Yeah. I didn't realize that until somebody told me that it must have been my shoes that made it.
That's fascinating.
And Rob, I think I know what you're going to mention because I was about to mention it. So go ahead.
The story Beyond, my book that I wrote with Bruce Gernon, that came out last year, called Beyond the Bermuda Triangle, where a couple actually walked into a village from the past. Was that what you were thinking of?
Actually, no.
About that story?
That was a good story too. No, I was thinking of very similar to that was the Christopher Reeve movie, Somewhere in Time.
Yes.
Where he was able.
It was the penny.
Yeah,
right?
He saw the modern penny in his hand, and that threw him out of the time period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. One of my Richard Matheson wrote
that. So it's obviously then that by what you're saying, it's obvious then that something modern from our day and age can bring you back out of this state that you've actually gone into, or this crossover in dimensions or whatever.
Right. Like you're holding an iPad. Oh, what's this?
Yeah.
Irene, this makes me think of what on some of our discussions about the mind and, the mind being able to transcend. And I'm not talking about our physical brains, this, the gray matter up in our heads, but the actual mind, that higher mind and self that's able to transcend dimensions.
That happens to me as well, doesn't it? I could be sitting here at a computer just sitting and it's like I just go somewhere else.
Well,
and then when you talk to me, I'm all shaky and can't kind of ground myself again.
They've done some research with DMT, where, in fact, there was a whole book. I can't remember the doctor's name, but it was a fascinating book showing that these people who were, the subjects of these experiments voluntarily, the kinds of things they experienced under DMT was outrageous. I mean, they would be in different time zones. They'd see aliens. It was like the mind was just completely open to whatever was out there.
Yeah.
Like ayahuasca experiences as well. Similar to that.
Well, I believe that. I do believe your mind is, certain people's minds, sorry, Mark, but certain people's minds are completely open, and you can travel through time you can sit in a chair, not move from that chair, but you actually are traveling through time.
Right.
You are throwing your mind out there. You're throwing it out into the universe, sort of thing.
Well, that could be what precognition is, too, at least one facet of precognition. Where if all time is simultaneous, you can tune into the future.
Yeah.
Just by opening yourself to it.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, very much so. And remote viewers do this as well. They do a very similar thing. Remote viewers.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
You can follow timelines.
And I think that's why Joe McMoneagle once said that it's not that remote viewers tune in on different realities. They tune in on what's correct, what's right on the answer.
Yeah.
I think that's where the training comes in.
Are you all right there? You're coughing.
Yes, I have to get some water. I'm getting over a cold.
So the story that I started to mention that took place on the island of Bermuda in 1964, it was with a U.S. guy on a U.S. Coast Guard cutter that was docked in St. George, Bermuda, and he had shore leave, and he met this young woman who was a nurse, a Navy nursing student who was on the island with her three friends. And so they went off together down to the beach and were watching the sunset and talking by this old fort. And then they decided to head back, and they saw this little trail leading away from the beach, and they decided to follow it. And it comes to a hill, and they suddenly stop and say, John is the man named John Murphy. I bet there's I sense there's a little British village on the other side of this hill, and Barbara says, yeah, and there's a little square, and there's a church there, and it has a steeple, and on top of the steeple is a clock, and it's stopped at 12:30, and they both laugh and continue walking on, go over the hill, and sure enough, they've never been on this island before. Look down, and there's this little village. They walk down into it, and it's they don't see any people there, but they see this church, and they try the door, and they shake the door, and it's locked. And they see lights, flickering lights like kerosene lamps inside the houses, but yet there's nobody there. And so they walk over to the by the graveyard there and sit on the rock wall there for a while, and then she spreads out a blanket because she'd been at the beach with her friends, and they lay down in the blanket, and he's feeling kind of amorous, and he gives her a hug, and he's about to kiss her, and their lips are about to meet, and they both pass out. And 2 hours pass, they wake up and look around, and they're still in the village, and she says, I got to get going back. So they walk back, and they feel kind of strange that, what happened? Why did we both fall asleep? And so and then they exchanged information, addresses, and that because she had to leave the next morning. So John went. It was like 3 days before John could go back and to get shore leave again. And he decided to go back to the village because he wanted to write her a letter and just kind of reminisce about this strange village. So he goes back, but there's no village. It's just an empty field. and he's just totally blown away by this experience. So he goes into town, into a bar, and orders a shot, and because he's so surprised and upset by he doesn't know what happened, and he says, he asks the bartender, this old guy, was there used to be a village down there in that direction? The guy looked at him and said, yeah, the St. Catherine, but that village was destroyed in the Great Hurricane of 1780 and was never rebuilt. So it's they actually experienced that village, and they were there. And what I find fascinating is they fell asleep and woke up, and the village was still there. And then they walk out, and then he goes back, and it's not.
And they both remember.
And they both remembered. He told me this story, and you got to wonder, is he just making this up? So he tracked down. He lost track of this woman for years, and he was never able to tell her about when he went back. He had communicated, changed letters, but he didn't want her to think that he's crazy, so he never mentioned that the village wasn't there. But then she sent him a Dear John letter that she was getting married. She didn't. She wouldn't write him anymore. But then with the internet, he started looking for her and finally tracked her down and found her. And he got her telephone number, called her, and waited several hours. She finally called him back, and he said, "You remember me? We met in Bermuda in 1964." And she said, "Yeah, I remember you." And he said, "We went to this little village. You remember going in there?" And she said, "Sure." And we sat by the graveyard there and laid down by the graveyard. I don't know if she said exactly that, but she remembered it. And then he told her it doesn't exist. And so that was when she first learned about it. So anyhow, I got her information, and I contacted her, and she verified the story that she had gone into that village with him, and the village of St. Catherine that was destroyed in 1780.
Wow, that is crazy, isn't it? It's just crazy.
Yeah.
Now I wonder what would have happened if they had decided to stay there. Okay, so they would disappear from this century.
It's strange that they both fell asleep.
Yeah, maybe they'd look at their shoes, Rob said.
Yeah,
and the village would disappear instead of them.
No, but what I'm thinking about is strange that they both fell asleep. When they woke up, was the village still there, or the graveyard?
Yeah,
or
the village. Everything was still there when they woke up. It was like. He doesn't know what happened, why they both fell asleep there. It was like they're under a spell almost. And, but you would think that when they woke up that there would be no village there, but it was still there.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, which is strange. And then they left, and then he comes back 2-3 days later, and there's no village there.
Yeah.
I've heard similar stories involving ufology accounts. People who...
That's just what I was thinking of.
Yeah, where people
missing time.
Well, not only with missing time, but people who claim that they've driven through some small town and they stop at an old gas station and ask for directions, or there's a hotel there or whatnot, and then when they go back the next day, there's no building and nothing is there.
How about,
we have a story
Deborah
about...
Fine.
Yeah, this woman... This is a fascinating story. She was a lifelong abductee. Okay, she had a daughter at some point, but in the years before she had her daughter, they had told her she would never get pregnant, that she just couldn't. And she got pregnant, and the doctor said, well, you're high risk, so I'm going to send you to a special clinic in Vermont, because at the time upstate New York didn't have anything for high-risk pregnancy. So she and her roommate started off one morning to go to this clinic in Vermont, about a 3-hour drive. Well, they went through, what was the name of that town, Rob, where there was an insane asylum?
It was right on the tip of my tongue.
Okay, well, anyway, there's a town in upstate...
Denimora.
Yeah, Denimora.
Denimora, right, yeah.
In this town, there was, for a long time, an insane asylum. And right after they went through this town, they encountered really heavy fog. And it was so bad, they couldn't drive. So they turned up this driveway into what looked like a barn that had been converted into like a little coffee shop. And so they went inside. A small couple.
Yeah, there was nobody else in there.
And a small couple served them a couple of sodas.
Yeah, they're kind of odd looking. They're only about 5 feet tall, both of them.
So we're already becoming suspicious here, see? So anyway, they remember nothing from the time they sipped the soda to when they were at the ferry,
right,
getting ready to cross Lake Champlain into Vermont.
They said it was an odd-tasting drink they gave them, and the next thing they know, they're waiting for the ferry, right, Trish?
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And had no memory.
So she got to the clinic, and they did the exam, and the doctor or nurse or whoever it was said, "You're not pregnant." She said, "Well, yeah, I'm pregnant. You've seen my blood tests, everything." They admitted they had seen the blood tests that confirmed her pregnancy. And at that point, she got really upset. She wanted to know what had happened in the pregnancy. So they gave her something to calm down. She and her roommate started the trip back to New York. On the way, they passed the same driveway, and there was nothing there.
Yeah, they went in, and they
just pulled in the driveway, and there was nothing, no building, nothing.
So
I've heard of that before. I've heard of people getting pregnant, and it's been proven that they're pregnant, and they've even had scans, and all of a sudden the baby just disappears from the womb.
Well, what she thinks is that the baby was taken, which is part of UFO lore also. So, who knows?
What's interesting is when you mentioned in that story that they had to drink some kind of liquid. That's actually something that's very common in UFO and abduction lore, is being made to drink a different type of liquid, either for forgetfulness or for some other type of transportation or something. So maybe it had something to do with coming into another reality, or maybe that whole part was a screen memory of some kind.
Thinking of screen memory that was actually maybe a UFO and they were abducted, and screen memory was that they had the image that they were in some kind of barn converted as a restaurant, and so that.
Yeah, to this day, she really doesn't. She's completely, understandably freaked out by this.
Oh yes,
not her experience either. There was another one. She was abducted once after going to a rock concert, and she's leaving and driving away, and I can't remember exactly how the abduction occurred, but she's in this craft and with these grays, and along with the grays right there is the singer from the group she had just watched. It was the lead singer for Guns N' Roses was in this craft. And she said, "What's he doing here?" And they said to her, communicating telepathically, "I thought you liked him." But they don't understand why she's so upset. And then his image changed into another gray. So that was like a screen image that they projected.
So they obviously are doing this to make you feel calm and peaceful.
Well, they think so anyway. In other words, they just
really.
But really, they're mixing you with your brain.
Yeah. What was it? Was it thin '80s Axl Rose or 21st century fat Axl Rose?
The old one.
The old one.
I would have gone for his autograph.
Fascinating stuff. Getting back onto the topic of spirit communication, I saw that on your book, Whitley Strieber did a review of it, and Whitley had his own book out last year, the Afterlife Revolution.
Fantastic book.
Yes, we had Whitley on our show. We had a great discussion with him. And, him talking about his wife, Anne. I've followed Whitley for years, and I remember with both he and Anne listening to Dreamland and their radio shows and following their blogs on the Unknown Country website. But, and then when, I felt really bad when she passed, and then he started mentioning about all this after death communication from her, and then he eventually wrote this book. Well, we had a great discussion with him, and we kind of had something that happened right after the show. And I had to call Whitley right afterwards to share it with him, because at one point towards the end of the show, he was telling this story, and he was telling it with such enthusiasm. He's like you're sitting around a campfire listening to this really, really intense story, and the storyteller's really getting into it. And when the show was over and we already signed off with him, Irene and I were talking, and I commented on that, like, yeah, did you hear Whitley? The way he was telling that story, he was just really into it. And then Irene said something that was so out of the blue, and so not her, that my jaw about hit the ground. She goes, well, that's just Whitley being Whitley. Irene Irene doesn't know Whitley. She hadn't met him before that night.
That was Ann.
Before we did that interview. You don't even remember that, do you, Irene?
I remember it now. You're talking about it,
right?
Mm.
That was Ann.
And I looked at her. I'm going. Well, I not looked at her. We're on Skype, obviously, but I looked at her in my mind, I guess, and like, what in the heck did you just say? And and then it just struck me. It's like Ann came through. And that actually is a phrase that I've heard Whitley attribute to Ann in the past. When he gets like that, she goes...
we had an experience very similar. The day that Ann died, which was August 11th of 2015, I think, the next day I heard about it, and I was writing him an email and telling him how sorry I was to hear that she had passed, and we've got this story in the book. And the minute I was starting to say, that if you need anything, we'll be glad to help. And as soon as I wrote the word no, there was a tremendous explosion in our family room, which is right off of our two offices. I mean, our dog jumped off the couch. Rob and I figured that something had blown. It sounded like a transformer blowing.
Electrical transformer, but inside the house, it was just a huge explosion. And we looked around and we thought the television had blown up or something. Something had fallen over. Nothing was disturbed. Everything was normal. But our offices are right adjoining each other, and next to it is like a family room and library, and it seemed to come right out from that area just outside of our office doors. And
so I immediately wrote Whitley about what had happened. I said, I think this was Ann. He goes, you sure as hell better believe she's there. And he said, I said something like, she's stirring up things on the other side, and she sure as hell is. And that's what it was. It was Ann.
Yeah, well, that day that we done the interview with him, I'd never even heard of him before. I didn't know him from Adam, so I do remember now. Because I remember you saying something about, do you know what you just said or something or other? And then I said to you something like, no, I don't remember. And then you turned around and told me what I'd said, Mark.
Mm-hmm. And you had no memory of it.
And you got in touch with him, didn't you?
Yeah,
and told him, and he said, "Oh, that's Ann."
Yeah, I called him up, and he just started laughing with delight, and he goes, "Oh yeah, that was Ann, all right."
Yeah.
We had another synchronicity with Whitley. He emailed us at a point. We got an email from him, and he asked us. It was kind of odd. Have you ever heard of the town of Casadega?
It's the place we mentioned before.
And we were just leaving the place. We had mentioned it before, the place with the mediums. And he said, I just have this.
No, he said, I was told.
Yeah, I was told that I should go there. And I said, well, we're just leaving. And so anyhow, we made an arrangement with him, and we went back, I don't know, a month or two later, and met him there. And also another writer, mysterious character named Peter Lavenda, who you should have on your show some.
He's great. He writes about all kinds of occult things.
Yeah, he's a mysterious character.
Okay.
So we all met in
Send us
Pasadena.
a contact for him, Anne. I mean, I called you Anne. Sorry. Trish.
Oh, that's funny. That's okay. I'll be Ann.
No, send us a contact for that man.
Okay.
Peter
His
Lavenda.
sinister forces, which are pretty mysterious, and a lot of other ones too. So he's an interesting person.
Right.
Working with the
Tom DeLonge.
the punk rocker, and writing about UFOs with him, and just had a book out last year.
Very interesting.
Two more for your show.
Okay. Well,
Very well spoken too, much better than us.
now other forms of spirit communication can happen in dreams. Is that right? Well, I know there are lots of stories that I've heard of people having dreams of loved ones who have passed and having conversations with them. Did you go into detail on that in your book?
Yeah, we do, because that's the most common way, I think, that spirits, at least initially, contact loved ones.
Right. So that's exactly it. So most spirit contact comes that way. Suddenly, it just happens with these synchronicities, like mentioned earlier, or in a dream, because your mind is not in the everyday world where you would question whether this is real. This is really happening, where you have you're suddenly having a conversation with your mother who's been dead 10 years or whatever. But there's also ways that people who are interested in making contact on their own can go about it. And we write about that in the book as well, which is related to the subtitle, Techniques for Tuning In and Making Contact. And the first thing about that is recognition is the first step. But you have to recognize that contact is possible, because if you're so skeptical, if you're a skeptic going into this, well, I don't believe this, but I want to see if I can make contact. So if you're that skeptical that you don't believe it, and you're saying you don't believe it, then your belief is probably going to be reinforced.
You're putting up a wall, sort of thing.
Right.
Exactly. And the second step then is awareness, just increasing your awareness to the many ways that spirit can make contact. They're not necessarily your deceased friend or family member is not necessarily going to appear as a phantasm in front of you, but it could be through these different means of signs and symbols and synchronous.
Gosh. Hold on.
What's that?
Yeah, sorry, that was our daughter. That's her sound for...
That's her telephone ring, is it?
Yeah.
I won't tell you what some of Mark's are.
So, you have to have that awareness, and then intention. You initiate the contact. You make a request, and you repeat it aloud. Maybe you type it out on your computer a few times and be very specific, and have a sense of a desire that you really want to make this contact, and not just something in passing. And then you give it attention and add that desire. So I'm almost done here. You give it attention, you add desire, and you visualize it, and maybe you add a fond memory, and then you let it go. No tension. You just let it go, and you've done what you needed, and see what happens. That it might appear in a dream or a synchronicity, a sign, a symbol, and actually you think that you're the one who, and maybe then something happens to confirm it, but you think you're the one who initiated it. Well, that spirit might have actually initiated you, and you followed all this process to get there, and thinking that you initiated, but maybe you didn't at all. But
it's like putting that thought out there, isn't it? into the universe.
Yeah, putting the thought and the intention,
yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Setting the intention. That's all part of like shamanic practices too, is for going into doing a journey and setting your intention. What are you looking to do? If you're looking to contact with certain spirits or guides. Now I remember, and again, I do have stories. This is what's funny. I could sit there in the past and say, "Oh, I'm not psychic. Nothing ever happens to me," and yet I turn right around and I have a story to share when things do happen, and I am.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you have a lot of stories.
I'm slightly sensitive. Let's put it that way. I don't claim to be a psychic, but I have times when things happen, and I remember a couple of months after my brother passed away. I was hoping he would come and visit me, and nothing happened. And then one night I was asleep, and I had a dream, and I found myself in this white room. It looked like white subway tile, almost like a clean white bathroom, but there was no stalls or urinals or anything. It was just a very white room. And I happened to turn...
Public toilet.
Yeah, well, you know what? That's actually apropos with my brother and I, because we both have toilet potty humor, senses of humor. But I turned and looked, and there was my brother standing there, smiling at me. And, in situations like that, you would think, oh, you give him a hug, you say, how are you? Oh, my God, or whatever. No, typical of our relationship, I took one look at him and I said, it's about flipping time you showed up. And I didn't use flipping.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
did he respond?
Well, here's what's funny. I knew from that point on we had a conversation, and I can't remember a thing about it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But we had a conversation, but that's where my memory of it ends.
Interesting. Maybe he told you something really important.
Yeah, if he did...
maybe he did. Maybe he told you something maybe about the afterlife or something that you're not meant to know.
So why tell me?
So it's gone deep into the back of your subconscious somewhere.
My whole thing is, then why tell me? Why tease me like that? Here, we're going to tell you something, but you can't remember it.
That's Bill.
Yeah.
He was a bit of a tease, wasn't he?
Yes,
you both are like it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yep, very interesting. I mean, I remember another time I was having a medical procedure done, and I was waiting in the room to be taken up, to be put out for the procedure. And I was just sitting there alone. I closed my eyes. I wasn't asleep or falling asleep or anything like that. I was fully conscious, but I was kind of in a meditative state. And all of a sudden, I felt like the room was filled with people. And in the room was my father who had passed, my mother's mother, my grandmother, my mother's sister, and my brother, all who had passed. Wow. And it was the strangest experience. My brother, he stayed in the back. It's like because I'd never had an experience with my father or my grandmother, my aunt, any of these other people before. So it's like he was there to let me know he's there, but he was stepping back. And this is all impressions in my head. And my dad was telling, it was such a simple little procedure I was going into, but you still have anxiety and whatever. And
right.
My dad was telling me it was all right. I was talking with my aunt, my grandmother, all in my head. And, it lasted a couple of minutes, and then I opened my eyes and everything was back to normal. But it was such a strong feeling at that time. I just genuinely feel that they were there.
They probably were.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, making sure you came through this okay and that you weren't scared. Kind of as a comfort thing.
Yes, that's how I took it. I mean, even my my aunt who had passed, my other aunt, her sister, a few months after she had passed, she woke up in the middle of the night, and there she was standing at the edge of her bed. And somebody else was with her that she didn't recognize. So,
I wonder who that was.
Either, I don't know, guide, angel, or whatever you want to call it. Somebody was with her she didn't know, but she had appeared to her sister. And there was like just, the little bit of communication saying everything's okay, yada, 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 but interesting types of communication.
Yeah, what you're saying is that you don't really feel that you're psychic per se, but then you've had these experiences. I think that's how it is for most of us, and we have these experiences, but we ignore them, and or they're just...
Or we don't remember them.
We don't remember them, but if we focus on it, we realize that, yeah, these things do happen to us, and we don't have to be, a psychic per se, but these...
I think they're open to everybody.
Yeah. That's the sense of our book, is what we're writing about. Another way of making contact we write about is through electronics, interestingly. There was one woman who contacted us named Kira, who had lost her oldest son in a car wreck. And very odd, his cell phone stayed charged for 2 years. And, how long do cell phones stay charged? And she would go back and check to listen to his message that he had, just to hear his voice. And she couldn't believe it. Month after month, she would listen to it, and then finally, after 2 years, it finally died. Which, how did that cell phone stay charged? She never plugged it in at all. She made clear that she never did that. And then, like 4 years later, she was making a Facebook post. She was excited that her boys were back. Her boys were back together. Her two surviving sons, who live in different areas, had both come to visit her. And as she finishes that Facebook post and sends it out, a Word file pops up, and it's this poem she had written about her lost son. And it was just so startling for her. She doesn't know how that poem popped up on her computer screen, but then she said, "My God, my son, they're all here. All three of them are here."
That's
we also
nice.
have another story about a woman who had lost her husband to brain cancer. And about a month or so after he died, she was texting both of her daughters about coming out to her. She lived in Oregon, coming out to the house and sorting, so they could sort through her husband's clothes and belongings and, divide everything up or decide what to do with it. So Nancy was saying, "Okay, you guys coming today to help with Dad's clothes?" And Jen says, "I guess." Nancy says, "What time?" "Jen, I don't know, I'm tired. When do you want me? Noon?" Then, it went on like that for a few minutes. And then suddenly, Nancy started to respond to Jill when the words, "he loved you," typed out on the line. She was so shocked that it took her a couple minutes to just continue. And she says, "I didn't type that. I was right in the middle of the thread, and I did not type that." And so her other daughter says, "He loves us." So that, and she said what's really interesting about that experience was that her husband was the kind that if he was upstairs and she was downstairs, he would just text her rather than calling down to her. So he was a texter. And that's how he communicated after life.
Yeah, there's a lot. There is a lot of that goes on. Sorry, Rob. Can I just say about this house?
Yeah, go ahead.
Herbert, he died. Oh God, when he died, I suppose telephones were about, but they were very rare, and there may have been one somewhere in the village that you'd have to go, but they weren't really in houses. And quite often, when I'm talking to friends on the telephone, if I have to leave the telephone for a period of time because I've been talking for a couple of hours and I want to go to the loo or something, I'll come back and that person will say to me, "I just had a man on here asking or calling for you."
Oh, wow.
My friend from New Zealand, she lovely lady, and I miss her very much. I haven't spoken to her for a while, but we used to sit on the phone for maybe 4 hours at a time. So in that time, I'd put the phone down on the mantelpiece and I'd go to the loo or go and make coffee and come back to the phone and one thing or another. And she said to me one day when she came on, she said, "There's been a man on here calling your name, Irene, Irene." And instantly I knew my dogs had been up to something. So I went into the room where my dogs were and they were tearing up the cushions on the sofa. So
they knew.
Yeah. Yeah. And another friend of ours, Sunny, she regularly used to talk if I was to me on Skype, and if I left it to go somewhere like the loo again or something, she'd come back and say, "Oh, Herbert's been on. He said hello," or Herbert said hello, because she heard
So
the
they
man
actually
say
hear his
hello.
voice.
Yeah, yeah,
Huh. Well, that's
Yeah.
pretty interesting.
yeah.
Hmm.
With
Do they ever talk
with the lady in, I don't know because I'm never there. But the lady
You
in
need
New
to tell your
Zealand,
people to do that.
the lady in New Zealand said that he was calling me by name, Irene, and Sonny used to say that he'd come on and it'd be a man's voice say hello. Have you heard anything, Mark?
Well, I mean, being an
House.
investigator, I've used, different electronic devices to record.
No, from this house. I mean,
Yeah, actually, I have. There was
You have?
there was a couple of times in the past I thought I heard something.
well, man,
Yes.
man.
Well,
Yes.
gosh, Mark, if it happens again, talk to him. ask him what it's like on the other side.
Well, that one's been a while. And sometimes they don't answer. Well, like you said, as an investigator, using different electronic devices to record, everything from digital recorders. They have this device, the SB7 Spirit Box, which scans radio frequencies. A lot of devices which are really hit and miss. I think not much beats a good old-fashioned just regular recorder. To pick up on these voices, which, that's the whole bit with EVP. You don't hear it at the time, but
Right.
you play it back and you've got a voice. Sometimes it's saying gibberish, and occasionally you're lucky to get actual intelligent communication. Now, there was one time I was doing an investigation and I was using the SB7 Spirit Box. And again, I take it with a grain of salt because if it scans regular radio stations, even though I was in the boonies, I have the antenna disconnected, so it's just white noise, but occasionally it can still pick something up. But this one time I was investigating this restaurant that used to be a home, goes back to the 1700s in New York State. And one of the former owners had killed himself in the house, and the house is very haunted. He's supposed to be there, as long as a few other ghosts. But he was connected to, 10 years prior, in 1972, he had a sister who lived down the street who was murdered. Found murdered, bludgeoned to death. Nothing was taken, no motive, nobody knew what it was. And supposedly, old Roy Vale, her brother, was a suspect, but they never charged him. They never had enough evidence against him. So one time I'm sitting here in the room where he killed himself, which is now a dining room. You could still see the bullet hole where they patched it up in the ceiling.
Wow.
He and I was asking, using the Spirit Box, I said, trying to get a hold of Roy, and I said, Roy, did you kill your sister? And a voice comes through and says, no. Okay, that, I take it skeptically, because it's like the radio frequencies. Maybe it was just something that came through. So I asked again, I go, Roy, if you didn't kill your sister, who did? And another voice came through and says, George did.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Who was George?
well, in doing a little bit of research, I couldn't find much, but supposedly there was a family friend named George who may have had a romantic relationship with his sister. And I don't know if he's still alive or what his last name was. Wasn't able to find any of that other information.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, but that did come through those type of electronic devices. And now, are you familiar with Gary Galka?
No.
Gary Galka is an engineer and inventor, and he invented one of the devices that a lot of us use, which is the Mel meter. And basically, it's a meter that simultaneously measures electromagnetic fields and temperature at the same time. And he named it Mel after his daughter, who died in a car wreck a few years earlier. And then his daughter's spirit was kept coming around and communicating with the family, and he was able to capture her using EVP, and he developed all sorts of different devices that paranormal investigators use. They use a lot of his devices. He's been on the Ghost Adventures TV show a lot, and he is very much involved in electronic spirit communication because he's been able to still deal with and have full conversations with his daughter.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
What's his name?
Gary Galka, Galka.
This goes back to like the 40s and 50s with a Russian investigator. His name was Radive. I can't remember his first, Konstantin, I think, Radive. He wrote a book, a thick book about, he basically used a radio and would just go in between stations and would get static, and he would ask questions. And he, according to his book, he was able to contact famous deceased people and have conversations with them. And it's a fascinating book. It was the first, I read it in the 1960s, I remember. It was the first I had heard about people making any kind of contact through any kind of electronic means.
See, we need to have more of this. And then people need to record these conversations.
Well, but you see, when I hear
questions,
I hear stories like this. Now, we've interviewed a couple of people who've been on our show in the past, and Irene, you remember Eamon Van Harris, who was on our show, and he had developed supposedly a device that he and this friend of his had put together that was used for direct spirit communication. And
yeah, he used it in the television show Most Haunted.
Yes. Yeah, he went on Most Haunted after that. Poor guy. Anyway,
yeah.
But and then there's another very similar device that some of these shows are using, like Nick Groff's show, Paranormal Lockdown, where it's almost like a stereo speaker, an amp. And it's used as a combination of radio waves, and it makes all these noises. And they think you can have like a real-time communication with a spirit. But, I have a lot of skepticism towards these devices because there's a lot of noise and crap that comes through them. And then they're jumping like, oh, I heard it say this. I heard it say that.
Right.
It's, there's a little bit of audio pareidolia going on there. So I'm not quite sure of that. Now, Eamon was telling us when they were doing experiments with it, they were able to contact this group on the other side who had their own device, and they were sharing information on improving the signal and making stronger communication. And his partner, his wife, had passed away, and they had her come on the device. And she even said, like,
not Eamon's wife.
Not Eamon's wife, his partner that he was working on it with. His wife, come on. And it's like having, a two-way radio conversation, like a ham radio operator with the other side. So he says. Now, I have yet to see any real evidence of these devices like this working like that, and the few I've seen on these radio shows leaves a lot to be desired as far as I'm concerned, because there's a lot of
well, you need to invent one.
Yeah, well, if I was a mechanical or electrical engineer, maybe I would.
Well, they don't. They really don't need all that paraphernalia, not if they can talk on a landline and on Skype as well in this house. Yeah.
Well, there are people. There's certain of the stranger communications. I'm sure you've heard these stories of people who get phone calls from the deceased.
Phone calls from the dead.
Yes.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Yeah.
Well, how do text messages happen?
Exactly.
It's the same type of thing. It's something. Who knows?
I
think part of it may have to do with the desire of the deceased to use anything at their disposal to communicate.
And if they're able to learn how to affect electronics, because not saying that spirits have an electromagnetic field, but I think that they are able to affect electromagnetic fields.
Too.
And so if they're able to affect those fields, then they can affect electronics. We've all heard stories of, TVs turning on and off by themselves. people using ITC, which I forget what the full word for that is. Inter-something communication. Intertransdimensional communication, where a perfect example is like taking a video camera hooked up to a TV monitor, point it at the TV, and cause a feedback loop. Have you heard of this process?
No.
This goes all the way back to the 60s and 70s that people have experimented with it, and they're still doing it today, where they will cause that feedback loop. And it looks like if you take two mirrors and put them across from each other and look into them, you see the mirrors going into infinity. It's the same kind of process, but it causes this really weird, strange, especially with video cameras, a weird, strange, morphing effect. And in that, you would see shapes that looked like forming people, and sometimes even sounds coming through it.
Yeah. Well, it's all interpretation, the sounds and the images, I mean, it's partially imagination, but who knows what imagination is?
Can I tell you a story about television? 30 years ago this was, when the old televisions had those big backs things, backs to them.
Right.
Massive big televisions. And we had one of those in the sitting room of our house in London. And I was watching the film. It was a cowboy film. And there they were, galloping across the plains, the cowboys, and one thing and another. And then up in the top right-hand corner, a woman's face appeared. Still, the film was carrying on with these cowboys galloping through, trying to get away from the Indians or whatever they were trying to do. But this face just stayed up in a woman's face stayed up in the top right-hand corner of the television screen. Anyway, I was talking to the old lady that lived next door one day, and I was telling her about this face in the television. She said, "Come inside." She said, "I want to show you a photograph album." So we went inside and went through all these photograph albums. She said, "If you see the face, just point it out." So I saw this woman's face in this album, and I said, "That's her, that one there." And she turned around and she said, "Oh," she said, "she died in your she was laid out in that sitting room." She said she lived in that house. She said that's somebody else's sister, Pam. Another friend of ours. She said, "That's Pam. Pam's family lived in the house. Her mother and father brought up 7 children in that house. And this is the daughter that died of bowel cancer. And she was laid out to rest in that sitting room that you're where you sit and have your tea and watch the television." She appeared on the television. It was just her face. She wasn't moving. She wasn't talking or anything like that. It was just like a picture of her face stuck up in the right-hand corner of the screen while the film just carried on playing on.
Huh.
And that was over 30 years ago.
For Christmas one year, I bought Rob a Tibetan singing bowl. And I bought it from a woman who used to go to Tibet and buy these things, and so I bought it for him for Christmas.
Oh,
Nepal, that's right. Mm-hmm. And right after this, we had these strange things start happening around our house. One day there was a $100 bill I was giving to Rob on the kitchen table. It vanished. The door, the key that was in the bathroom, we couldn't find it for 9 years. And so I wrote this woman about it. I said, "Do you think this is related to the singing bowl?" And she goes, "Yeah." She says, I had a woman who bought one of these and said that the monk started haunting her house, and so she returned it. So the joke now was, well, we've got this monk who's sort of a trickster around the house. So one night, Rob had the singing bowl out, and so I kind of said to the singing bowl to the monk, I said, "Okay, we get the message. We need that $100 bill back. I'd like the key to the bathroom." But so there are things in objects too.
That singing bowl, it's like the monk was very suspicious of me. Started using that in my yoga class at the end, where I would take the, I don't know what it's called, the stick, and run it the wood around the edge of it, making kind of a nice humming sound, and you could change the tune a little bit and make it higher or lower. And sometimes it would not work at all. I could not get anything, and I would give somebody else after class, try to make a sound with it. Nothing would happen. Then the next time it would work perfectly fine. It was like he's playing tricks with me so I now kind of when I get ready for it, I just ask the monk, are we ready? Silently.
Do you think the monk came with the bowl, Rob? Do you think he came with the bowl, or he was attracted to the bowl?
Yes, I think he came with the bowl, because this woman who sold it said she only bought bowls that were authentic, and these bowls had belonged to monks, and the monks had died, and the bowls were passed on.
I think we're all, multidimensional beings, and it's not like the monk is just sitting with that bowl. I think he's got other things he's doing in the afterlife, but some aspect of him is still related to that bowl that comes through, is the way I look at it.
So when it rings at a certain pitch or something, obviously it brings the monk down. It's like a doorbell calling him. That's great. That's fantastic. I've never had one of them. I've seen them, but I've never had one. I've seen them on the television. I've heard them on the television. The sound is absolutely fantastic from them.
It's something that if you experience it live, because the vibrations that go through you when these bowls are singing, I mean, the vibration permeates throughout the air and goes right through your body, and at certain frequencies it just causes your whole body to resonate.
Yeah.
Right out through the room, yeah. And supposedly this was an antique, the one I have, and that the story is that this was the monk's begging bowl that's where he would eat out of in his life. He'd take it around, and people would donate food to him, and that's how he lived.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why he took the $100.
Yeah.
So he could eat.
Well, there's many things disappears in this house. It used to be cigarette lighters. Then God knows how many pairs of glasses, eyeglasses that have gone missing. It's unbelievable. But occasionally, you have little stones thrown at you or something like that. And especially me. For some reason, they seem to like to throw stones at me in my hallway. They come out of nowhere, and they always just miss me, zoom past my ears. But I was in the kitchen. I was in the kitchen one day when one dropped through the ceiling, and I was there with about 6 people. We were all talking, and they all saw it drop, and it could only have come, through the ceiling.
Are you sure it wasn't Yvette Fielding?
Throwing stones.
Well,
that's great, but there were witnesses.
Well, I actually, this is ironic. We had an investigation a few years ago here in New Jersey. Some friends of ours, we were investigating their house, and there was one night we were standing there, and twice in one night we were all standing in a group, and all of a sudden a quarter just fell out of nowhere right in the floor in front of us.
Oh, wow.
And that would happen a couple of times. And, we tried to make sure, were they doing it, looking for attention? Was somebody not looking? He flips it out of his pocket or something. But there were too many of us standing around looking. We would have seen it.
Did it stay on the floor?
Yeah.
Or did it vanish?
No, it stayed there. We picked it up and we had it. But it just came out of nowhere.
Trish, can I ask, did you get your $100 back?
No.
Oh, thieving little toe.
But we did find the key. The key 9 years later. I had opened the bathroom door one day to let the cat out, and there was the key stuck in some stones.
Yeah.
It was the strangest thing.
Yeah, and very visible.
Yeah.
Wow.
Took him 9 years to do it, but at least he returned it.
You had that experience. Trish, from your younger years with the sewing needles, right?
Oh, yeah, this is one of the strangest. I lived with a woman in college whose grandmother was, she was a seamstress. And after she passed, we started finding straight pins all over the house, all over our apartment. And I said to my roommate, I said, where's this stuff coming from? We don't sew. Neither one of us did. And a couple months later, I guess, we went to her mother's house in Albany, which was about 90 miles away. And she said, Trish and Linda, she says, you're not going to believe this. My mother has been here. I'm finding passages in the Bible underlined with straight pins, finding them stuck in cushions. I thought, oh, okay, this is the haunted object. All right. 10 years later, I'm at the Fort de San Marcos in St. Augustine, which is like the oldest fort in the United States or something, and there's nothing in it, but it's just stone, and you can walk through and see where prisoners were held and where guards slept and that kind of thing. We're walking along, and all of a sudden I look down, and I see a straight pin at my feet, and I picked it up, and I said, look at this. And my old roommate's mother she just chuckled, and she goes, oh, my mother's here. So there was something that happened over a period of many years.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen any straight pins for years.
My husband always knows when his father's about because his shoelaces get undone. Well,
Really?
always just one shoelace. One shoelace will come undone. And he'd turn around and say, oh, Dad's about. Yeah.
Yeah, it's strange. They pick different things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how he recognizes it anyway. You know, but nobody comes to see me much. Well,
because you're so pleasant.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Unless you get your
tell him to nap off.
Yeah, you get your wandering stranger stinking of BO.
Oh, yeah. I do. I tell you, one night I was laying in bed and the most horrendous smell was right in my face, and it was just like there was this, I don't know, unearthly being close up to my face, just breathing this horrible smell into my face. So I had to turn over the other side of the bed and poke my head under the covers so that I couldn't.
That would kind of freak me out.
No, it doesn't frighten me. It just makes me annoyed, you know. So, especially when you've got to breathe into the quilt, or what do you call them over there? The duvet.
They take your
Comforter. Your
elsewhere.
comforters. Yeah, what you call a comforter. You've got to breathe into that to stop the smell. But this was a putrid smell. I know it was a mixture of dead bodies and God knows what else. And I've smelled a few of them. Oh, it was horrible. Absolutely horrible.
Tell Pickles to behave.
I just heard that.
Yeah.
We have a regular animal circus here.
No, well, I've normally got the office, but at the moment there's a lot of repairs going on in there. So I'm sitting in the family room now. I've got my desk set up in the family room. Everything's set up here. But, you know, with this, this is a parrot, and moving him away from the window, he's 36 years old, isn't it, Mark? 36, 37 years.
Something along those lines.
Yeah. He'd get stressed if I moved him away from the window that he's at. And if I tried covering him up, that would stress him because he's never been covered. So, unfortunately, we got to put up with him. But you know, he's sweet.
Well, yeah.
Sweet. He's the most evilest parrot on earth.
Yeah, he will rip your face off if given half the chance.
He looks nice.
Yeah, it looks nice until you turn your back, and then a little bugger gets you. Rob and Trish, now, in part of what you're looking at in this book, what are your thoughts on? How can I put this? We've heard of sleep paralysis, and have you looked into people who are experiencing sleep paralysis as experiencing a form of spirit communication?
You know, we have a story about the Hat Man. I don't know if you've heard about the Hat Man. This is somebody who usually appears to people while they're sleeping wearing a cape and an old-style hat with the rim all the way around it, and very ominous character that stands in the corner or near the bed staring at him. And when that happens, people are generally just frozen. They cannot move and having that sleep paralysis. And so there's been a book written about the Hat Man, at least one, and it's a phenomenon that many people have.
Well, I've been avoided that one. So thank you.
I've heard of that, the Hat Man. It's very, very similar to the old hag syndrome, but yeah. And a lot of people report seeing the actual Hat Man in a doorway, standing in the doorway of the bedroom.
Right. Yeah, he's got a round face, heavy eyebrows, dark eyes, a receding hairline.
That's the other one.
Oh, really?
That one's called That Man. A lot of people have seen that guy too, and he's not necessarily creates a sense of evil or anything, but he appears in people's dreams. And it started with a psychiatrist had a patient who drew the picture of that man with describing him. The picture is very much like Trish just described him. And then somebody else came into his office and said, "Hey, I've seen that person in my dreams." And then it started getting distributed around the internet, and suddenly there's thousands of people who have seen that man. So we write about him as well.
It's like these archetypes. The internet facilitates this stuff too. Maybe somebody in Africa has a particular experience, and if it weren't for the internet, we'd never know about it. Once somebody else hears about it, then, oh, wow, I've experienced that. So maybe it's an these are...
Go ahead.
I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
I was just saying, maybe these are emerging archetypes.
Well, I think sometimes these things can tap into our psyche, and they present themselves in such a way that, so A, that we can understand it, and B, that, to make a point coming across. It's not what they actually look like. There's the phenomenon that's been around the last, 10 years now of Slender Man. Okay, now...
Oh, I haven't heard this one.
Oh, you haven't heard of Slender Man? I should talk. Dave Schrader has done many shows on Slender Man. But what it was is Slender Man started off as a fictional creation online. Somebody made up a myth about this Slender Man that people would see, and it became such an internet meme. It took on a life of its own. They even came out a year or so ago with a Slender Man movie.
Really?
Yes, a horror movie. And also, it became such a phenomenon that this was in the news, and you should Google this and look it up. There were these two girls who planned to murder a classmate of theirs, saying that Slender Man told them to do it.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And they got caught, thankfully.
Oh, they didn't manage to murder her.
No, thankfully,
I
no.
thought they actually did murder her.
No, they didn't murder her. I think that it was foiled, but, they were caught. And they were trying to blame it on Slender Man. But again, Slender Man being a fictional creation. But so many people took it as being real that it took on a life of its own and became an archetype.
People were reporting seeing Slender Man all over the place, weren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, it goes the same way how people... There are times I really feel that these things, entities, whatever we want to call them, are definitely able to manipulate their appearance to look like, whether they're actual shape-shifting or it's just they're able to put the perception in our mind of what they look like. Whether they look like Axl Rose or they look like a gray alien. I dealt with ghost investigations where one of my clients called me up freaking out because that morning she woke up and saw this white figure by her dresser, and it turned around and looked at her, and she said, I don't want to tell you what it is. You'll think I'm crazy. And I go, no, I don't think you're crazy.
Oh,
Tell
I
me.
remember that.
Yeah, and she said, Mark, it was a flippin' alien. And... but she never dealt with anything that was alien-like in her property. It was always...
Right.
Something that we felt was attached to the land. So for whatever reason, it gave that impression. And I think that these things can do that. They can change their persona, how they look, in order to how they want to be perceived to present themselves. Now,
yeah, I think you're probably right.
And now I was asking you earlier about, sleep paralysis, and the reason I was asking that is I have another experience to share, where this house I first lived in when I first moved here to New Jersey almost 20 years ago had a lot of activity, and that was the only location in my life where I've stayed where I experienced sleep paralysis. I would wake up several times, and it felt like this big weight was pushing me down in the bed, but I couldn't see anything. I couldn't move. I could kind of open my eyes some, but I wasn't seeing anything. It just felt like an energy. And the last time I experienced it, I woke up in bed, and I was paralyzed. I couldn't move, felt the pressure, and then in my right ear, I could hear a man talking, trying to say something to me. Well, I couldn't understand what he was saying. So I was able to keep my wits about me, and I said, I can't understand you. Can you slow down, speak slow and loudly so I can hear you? Well, then it spoke again, this time a little bit louder and a little angrier, but I still couldn't understand it. And then I told it again, in my mind, of course. I said, look, I can't understand you. Will you just slow down, speak clearly, and I can hear you? And the only way I can describe it is that I didn't see this. This is my impression, that this person got right in my face and was screaming at the top of his lungs in like an anger or rage. And at that point in my mind, I said, okay, that's it. You're done. You're out of here. And I mentally imagined myself throwing him out over my head out the window and using my own energy to push it out. And after a moment or so, it dissipated, went away, and I was able to wake up.
Wow. That's pretty scary.
You know what's funny? I wasn't frightened. I was more irritated with it than anything.
Yeah, but being immobilized like that's invasive.
But it is, but yet I can honestly say it felt like I was in an altered state of consciousness. But I was conscious. I could feel it. It wasn't like waking up and like, oh my God, I'm paranoid. I'm paralyzed. I can't move. I'm free. And then having high anxiety and freaking out. It was, my whole body was felt electrified, tingly, felt like this pressure. And so I wasn't reacting to it in an emotional state.
Right.
So I didn't get afraid of it. I very rarely get afraid of this stuff when it happens. I'm more curious than anything. The only time I've ever gotten freaked out is like I was at Rolling Hills Asylum once, walking down a darkened hallway in the middle of the night by myself. Yeah, then the creep factor kicked in.
It's called old horror movies.
Yeah, you're just waiting for something to pop out from one of the doorways in front of you.
Exactly. Yeah.
I got one more story. We had one experience in Dominican Republic where we rented this room in a hotel right on the beach. It looked great on the internet. Beautiful place right on the beach with a garden in the middle, and we had a room in the backside on the second floor that overlooked everything. Well, when we get there, what it overlooks is not a garden but a graveyard. The center of the hotel, it wraps around an old graveyard, or we thought it was an old graveyard, and so our daughter was a little disturbed by seeing that you go on the front porch and we're right next to a graveyard. One day the gate was open, so Trish and I walked in there, and the first thing, this was a windsurfing vacation. I was a long time windsurfer, and the first thing we saw was this half of a windsurfing board sticking up in the ground. This guy had died. I don't know if he drowned or what. He was a windsurfer, and
Rob, I'm sorry, you're breaking up really bad.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Do I sound better now?
Much better, yes.
Much better. Okay, yeah, I was on speaker. So we walk out into the graveyard, and there's this the top half of the windsurfer is stuck in the ground, and that's his grave marker. And then an old man comes up with a shovel, and he's a grave digger, and he asks us, do you want to see? He explains this to Trish in Spanish. Trish grew up in Venezuela, and she's very fluent in Spanish, and explains that this graveyard, the sand here goes up rather than washing out and disappearing. There's more the sand keeps coming up and it rises up. So there's one grave on top of another grave on top of another grave. So he was digging a grave to bury somebody and comes to a lower graveyard, and he says, "You want to see this old coffin and body?" And we said, "I don't think so." So we decided to leave. I picked up a rock for some reason, and we go back to the room, and our daughter, by this time, she wants to get out of there. She does not want to be by this graveyard anymore. So we talked to the management, and they put us in a room on the side. And now our front porch looks right out on the ocean, which is nice. But actually, the door where we enter the room is actually closer to the graveyard than before. So we're the only one in this whole section of the hotel. And that night, we went to sleep fairly early. Our daughter was in the back room sleeping, and I think it was around 11:30 or so. And I had just gotten to sleep when I heard this sound like something just smashing against the side of the building. Boom, boom, boom. 3 times. There was a pause, and then again, boom, boom. 3 times. I heard it 3 times, and then I sat up, and Trish sat up simultaneously. She had heard this too, and it was like, was this happening? Was this physical, or was this a dream? I thought it was a dream. I was waking up from a dream, but Trish said she heard it as well. But it had this whole sense to it, to feel that it was otherworldly, and it was like a wrecking ball hitting the side of the building. And then the television came on, and we hadn't had the television on at all. And so, but the feeling that, remember earlier I had said we had that experience in the Casa Diego Hotel where we felt terror with this being. This felt uplifting, really positive, and just energizing, coming right out of sleep and being so energized by this sensation of contact like that. And so in the morning, Trish mentioned it. First we wanted to find out if there was an earthquake or something that would have caused that, and there was nothing like that. And the management said, "Well, yeah, there are spirits here, but they're friendly." And and we're leaving that
and he
day.
threw the stone away.
Yeah, I took that stone and tossed it back into the graveyard before we left.
Wow.
But that wasn't scary, though.
No, not scary at all. It was uplifting, actually. So it's interesting, the different types of contact experience.
Wow. Well, we actually have run out of time here, and I know you've both got to get going, but I want to thank you so much. Tonight we were talking with Trish and Rob MacGregor about their new book, Secrets of Spirit Communication, Techniques for Tuning In and Making Contact. And Trish and Rob, where can people find your book and get in touch with you?
Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com are the best places to look for our books.
And our blog is blog.synchrosecrets.com. That's where we post most of our stuff most frequently.
Yeah, every couple of days we put in new posts about this stuff.
Trish.
Synchrosecrets.com.
Yeah, Trish, I hope you get well soon. I'm sorry you're not feeling too good.
I'm on drugs, so I'm on antibiotics. This will help.
Well, you keep popping them, sweetheart.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks so much. You two are great hosts.
Thank you very much. We enjoyed it.
Well, thank you for coming on, and we want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in to another edition of Paranormal UK Radio Show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And Irene, where can people find us?
Just about everywhere. Everywhere.
Everywhere. You catch us live streaming Wednesday nights at 10 p.m. Greenwich Mean and Eastern Time on our the Paranormal UK Radio Network.com, TalkStream Live, TuneIn Radio. Yep. You name it, we've got it. And, of course, we also have our shows archived on Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, Spreaker, Mixcloud. Oh, God. I keep running out of
all the clouds.
All the clouds. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time. Everyone have a great evening. Irene, we'll catch you soon.
Okay, then. Night-night.
Bye-bye.